breaking. Just before dawn, in the misty silence over eastern Ukraine, something unimaginable unfolded. A thunderous roar shattered the calm as the earth convulsed beneath a blast so powerful it was heard miles away. In a matter of seconds, a tunnel that once pulsed with Russia's military command traffic, strategic convoys, encrypted communications, and high-ranking generals was reduced to a crater of twisted steel and molten concrete. Reports say Ukraine had been waiting, watching, calculating every move. When those generals finally stepped inside, the sky opened up, and a 900-kilogram American-made JDAM bomb found its mark. This wasn't a random strike. This was precision beyond belief. Ukrainian intelligence had monitored this secret tunnel base for weeks, tracing patterns, mapping movement, waiting for that perfect alignment of arrogance and opportunity. The Russian generals believed they were safe, buried deep underground, surrounded by concrete and command systems. But Ukraine's new arsenal, guided by GPS, powered by Western technology, had just proven that nowhere is safe anymore. In the minutes following the explosion, chaos consumed the Russian front. Communication lines went dark, rescue units scrambled, and firestorms illuminated the night sky over the Donetsk region. Satellite images from the next morning revealed a scene that looked more like a meteor strike than a military base. The crater stretched wide enough to swallow trucks whole. Nearby hills still smoldered. Local residents described the ground trembling for nearly a minute, windows shattering miles away. One elderly villager told a local Ukrainian outlet, "It felt like the end of the world." But this wasn't just an attack, it was a message. Kyiv was signaling something very clear. The era of untouchable Russian command posts is over. For months, Ukraine's forces had been quietly adapting to Western targeting systems, integrating American JDAM kits onto their aging Soviet bombs, transforming them into precision-guided nightmares. And now, those modifications had produced one of the most devastating strikes of the entire war. Russian media tried to contain the story. They claimed it was a minor explosion, a localized fire, a technical malfunction. But within hours, Telegram channels flooded with photos that told a different story. Columns of smoke, scorched vehicles, emergency convoys rushing in and out of the area. One channel linked to Wagner veterans even admitted, "We lost officers there. This wasn't an accident. This was a trap." The trap, as Ukrainian insiders now reveal, had been in the making for nearly 3 weeks. Drones had captured unusual movement, a rotation of high-ranking officers, increased radio activity, and a convoy of armored vehicles entering the base daily at 8:45 a.m. The Ukrainians held fire, resisting the temptation to strike too soon. They wanted to make sure the right people were inside. And when they finally confirmed it, when the target list matched the arrival of key generals, they called in the coordinates. The launch was swift, almost silent. A single JDAM, weighing nearly a metric ton, glided across the grey morning sky from dozens of kilometers away. No warning sirens, no scrambling defenses, just the eerie quiet before impact. The moment it hit, sensors from nearby drones recorded the shockwave rolling across the landscape like a tidal wave of dust and flame. Inside the tunnel, the explosion amplified concrete turned to shrapnel, steel doors folded like paper, and within seconds, the Russian command post ceased to exist. Military analysts call it one of the most precise long-range strikes of the war. But for Ukraine, it was more than that, it was personal. For months, Russian artillery from that same command network had bombarded nearby towns, killing civilians and soldiers alike. Now, Ukraine had finally answered. And they didn't just strike back, they erased the very system that ordered those attacks. Moscow, of course, went into panic mode. The Ministry of Defense issued an emergency statement denying any loss of personnel. But the silence from usually vocal pro-Russian bloggers told another story. For the first time in months, the Telegram front went quiet. No triumphant reports, no celebratory claims, just silence and speculation. Some whispered that a general from Russia's southern military district had been among the dead. Others hinted that electronic warfare officers and intelligence commanders were inside the facility during the blast. None of it confirmed, but all of it deeply unsettling for the Kremlin. Meanwhile, in Kyiv, the reaction was calm but confident. Ukrainian officials didn't boast. They didn't even confirm the operation publicly. But behind closed doors, one intelligence officer was quoted saying, "We waited for them to gather. Then we introduced them to Western precision." That quiet confidence spoke louder than any press conference. The geopolitical implications were immediate. Western military analysts began revising their assessments, noting how quickly Ukraine was mastering advanced targeting systems. The use of JDAM's joint direct attack munitions proved Ukraine could now hit hardened underground positions that were once thought untouchable. For the first time, Russian command infrastructure was within reach. It wasn't just about territory anymore, it was about dismantling the brain of the Russian war machine. And this single devastating strike, might have done exactly that. Intercepted communications later revealed Russian units in nearby sectors suddenly cut off from central command, unsure whether to retreat or hold. Some fled without orders, others waited, paralyzed. For a brief chaotic moment, Russia's front line became headless. But that was just the beginning. Because what happened under that hill wasn't an isolated incident, it was part of a larger Ukrainian strategy, one designed to break Russia's coordination from within. The tunnel base wasn't chosen by chance. It connected directly to a network of subterranean command lines, a Cold War-era system Russia had relied on for decades. Destroying it wasn't just symbolic, it was surgical. And yet, amid the smoldering ruins, one question began spreading from Kyiv to Moscow to Washington. How did Ukraine know? How did they time it so perfectly? Who leaked the schedule of those generals? Was it intelligence from the West, a defector inside Russia's ranks, or something far more unexpected? That question would haunt Moscow for days. And, as we'll uncover in the next chapter, the truth behind that perfect strike, the preparation, the technology, and the psychological warfare leading up to it, would reveal just how far Ukraine has come, and how deeply Russia underestimated them. Because this wasn't luck, it was precision born of patience. Stay with us, because what came next shocked even Ukraine's allies. In the hours after the blast, Russian channels flooded with confusion. Some claimed sabotage, others blamed a freak ammunition accident. But Ukrainian intelligence knew better. They had orchestrated every second of it. This wasn't chance. It was the product of months of reconnaissance, sleepless nights, and a deadly patience that paid off in a single fiery moment. What began as whispers from intercepted communications had grown into a meticulous plan to strike the very heart of Russia's command infrastructure. It started deep in the intelligence corridors of Kyiv, where a small task force known informally as Falcon Eyes tracked Russian field movements. Their analysts had discovered an anomaly, unusual patterns of encrypted transmissions coming from a supposedly decommissioned Soviet tunnel complex near Horlivka. The Russians had quietly refurbished it into a command bunker, one built to coordinate supply convoys and direct artillery fire across the Donetsk front. To most, it was invisible. To Ukraine's new intelligence systems, it was a glowing beacon. For weeks, drones buzzed silently above the site, mapping everything: vehicle entries, shift changes, guard rotations. The patterns were clear. Every morning, a group of high-ranking officers arrived at precisely the same time. They stayed for hours. That consistency was the crack in Russia's armor. The Ukrainians knew that to inflict maximum damage, they had to wait until those officers, those decision-makers, were all inside. A premature strike would waste a priceless opportunity. So, they waited. Meanwhile, a parallel team prepared the weapon. The JDAM Joint Direct Attack munition wasn't new to warfare, but for Ukraine, it was revolutionary. These kits, supplied by the United States, transformed unguided bombs into precision-guided munitions using GPS coordinates. The problem? Ukraine had to retrofit them onto old Soviet-era aircraft not designed for such systems. It took engineers, programmers, and pilots working side by side under blackout conditions to make it happen. The risk was enormous. But when they succeeded, Ukraine gained something it had never had before: the ability to strike with surgical precision from far beyond the front line. When confirmation came that the tunnel base would host a meeting of Russian command staff, everything moved into motion. Satellite imagery verified a new convoy entering the site. Intercepted chatter suggested the presence of senior officers. Ukrainian intelligence sent a single encrypted message up the chain: the nest is full. That night, air crews prepped the modified JDAM under cover of darkness. Each technician knowing what this mission meant, not just tactically, but symbolically. This was vengeance wrapped in technology. The weather was perfect: low cloud cover, minimal wind. From an undisclosed airstrip, the aircraft lifted off, banking toward the front lines, staying low to avoid detection. The coordinates were uploaded mid-flight. At 30 kilometers out, the pilot armed the payload and released. The bomb sliced through the night, gliding on invisible wings, its GPS locked onto a point the size of a single vehicle door. Inside the bunker, Russian officers were reviewing maps of their next offensive, unaware that their final moments were ticking down. At precisely 6:42 a.m., the JDAM struck. The delay between impact and full detonation was less than a second. The shockwave crushed the tunnel walls inward, vaporizing the command room, and igniting stored munitions that amplified the explosion 100-fold. Drones orbiting nearby recorded the moment as the earth buckled a white flash, then a column of smoke towering into the dawn. Within seconds, Russian radio networks went silent. In Moscow, panic spread quickly. Emergency channels buzzed with frantic calls, but no one answered. One intercepted communication captured a desperate voice shouting, "The bunker is gone! Repeat, the bunker is gone!" By sunrise, Russian command posts across Donetsk were operating blind. Artillery crews didn't know where to aim. Supply trucks froze mid-route, waiting for orders that would never come. It was total chaos. Back in Kyiv, the command center erupted in quiet applause. There were no cheers, no celebration, just nods of grim satisfaction. They had done what seemed impossible. The impossible was now real, and they knew the shockwaves of this success would travel far beyond the battlefield. Western allies, long cautious about the effectiveness of their aid, were now seeing tangible proof. Ukrainian crews had taken advanced American tech, blended it with old Soviet hardware, and achieved results even NATO hadn't predicted. This was innovation under fire. The Kremlin's reaction was immediate and furious. Within hours, Russian media called it an act of Western aggression, implying NATO had conducted the strike directly. The statement was designed to shift blame, but it only confirmed what many analysts already suspected. The loss was catastrophic. Russian telegram networks, usually filled with bravado, descended into chaos. Pro-war bloggers demanded retaliation. One even wrote, "We are being hunted. No bunker is safe." That message was quickly deleted, but screenshots spread faster than Moscow's censors could react. For ordinary Russian soldiers, the psychological blow was devastating. Rumors spread across the front that their generals had been wiped out in one strike. Morale plunged. Troops began refusing to enter bunkers for fear of being next. It was more than just the loss of officers, it was the loss of faith in protection. Ukraine hadn't just destroyed a target, it had shattered an illusion. And yet, behind the Ukrainian success lay an even deeper strategy. Sources close to the operation revealed that the timing was chosen not only for maximum damage, but also for maximum political effect. The strike coincided with a major Kremlin press briefing, meant to highlight Russia's stabilization of the Donetsk sector. When the explosion hit, those plans were instantly derailed. The narrative crumbled. For the first time, state media had no script ready, no heroic footage to air, only silence, confusion, and denial. Western intelligence confirmed what Moscow refused to admit. The tunnel base had been a critical node in Russia's command structure. Its destruction severed direct links to several frontline divisions, delaying operations for days. Military experts estimated that rebuilding such a facility could take months, if it could be rebuilt at all. In that time, Ukraine would continue pressing the advantage. Still, questions lingered in the Kremlin. How had Ukraine penetrated their encryption? How had their schedules been exposed? Theories swirled: traitors, spies, satellite leaks, but no clear answer emerged. Inside Russia's defense ministry, paranoia spread like wildfire. Internal investigations began. Officers were reassigned. Phones were confiscated. But the truth was simpler and far more dangerous for Moscow. Ukraine's intelligence capabilities had evolved beyond what Russia could control. As the smoke cleared over Donetsk, analysts across Europe began calling it a turning point. The precision, timing, and psychological weight of the strike marked a new phase of the war. No longer was Ukraine simply reacting, it was dictating the tempo. The hunter had become the architect of the battlefield. But while the world watched the footage of smoldering ruins and burning vehicles, another story was unfolding behind the scenes. In Washington and Brussels, discussions intensified. What Ukraine had just proven would change everything about Western support strategy. The question wasn't whether Ukraine could win, it was how far the West was willing to let it go. And as for Moscow, this wasn't just a loss, it was a revelation. A revelation that the war it thought it controlled was slipping through its fingers. Because somewhere under that shattered tunnel lay more than officers. It lay the myth of Russian invincibility. But what happened next? The chain reaction this single strike unleashed would send shockwaves far beyond the battlefield. Because within hours, something even more unexpected began. Stay with us, because this is where the real story begins. By the following morning, smoke still curled upward from what used to be the Horlivka tunnel base. But even before the fires went out, the political shockwaves had already reached Moscow, Washington, Berlin, and London. Every intelligence satellite pointed toward that single scar on the earth. And every defense analyst in the West was saying the same thing. This wasn't just another strike, it was a strategic earthquake. Inside the Kremlin, confusion turned into panic. Hours after the explosion, Russia's Ministry of Defense convened an emergency session. Dozens of generals were missing. Communication with key frontline units was severed. The state-run news channels, which normally broadcast victory reels and patriotic speeches, switched abruptly to scheduled maintenance segments. It was damage control in real time. Meanwhile, Ukraine's military command watched the aftermath unfold with the same steady patience that had defined their entire operation. They didn't need to gloat. The world was already doing that for them. Western media erupted with headlines calling it the most precise strike of the war. Analysts from NATO's Allied Command hailed the operation as proof that Ukraine had entered a new era of warfare, one defined by intelligence, fusion, stealth, and psychological dominance. For Russia's troops on the ground, the effect was devastating. Soldiers stationed near Donetsk reported broken supply chains and delayed orders. Some units, unable to reach Central Command, retreated without authorization. Others sat paralyzed, unsure who was still alive to lead them. Within 24 hours, chaos spread like wildfire across multiple sectors of the front. Russia's once rigid command structure was splintering from the inside. And it wasn't just military collapse, it was moral collapse. In the towns near the strike zone, local residents whispered stories of officers fleeing in unmarked vehicles. Military bloggers, once the loudest voices of Kremlin propaganda, began posting in panic. "This was not an accident," one wrote, before deleting his message minutes later. "Someone gave Ukraine our exact coordinates." That single sentence sparked an internal witch hunt within the Russian military. Phones were seized, officers interrogated, loyalty questioned. The Kremlin's paranoia had found a new target, its own generals. In Kiev, President Volodymyr Zelensky held a late-night address. Calm, deliberate, his words were few but cutting. "When darkness hides aggression, precision brings justice." He never mentioned the JDAMs or the tunnel directly. He didn't need to. Every Ukrainian watching understood the message. This was revenge not for one battle, but for months of suffering, blackouts, and civilian deaths. For ordinary Ukrainians, it was a moment of pride and defiance. Social media filled with images of Ukrainian flags overlaid on satellite photos of the crater. Hashtags like #unbreakable and #precision justice trended overnight. It wasn't just about destruction, it was about balance. For the first time in months, they felt the scale tipping their way. Across the Atlantic, Washington's mood was cautious but optimistic. Pentagon officials publicly refused to comment, but privately celebrated the proof of concept. Ukraine had just demonstrated how Western precision tech could decimate hardened Russian infrastructure. It validated months of strategic planning and billions of dollars in aid. Behind closed doors, discussions began about expanding JDAM supplies, improving drone integration, and training more Ukrainian pilots on long-range targeting. One analyst called it the blueprint for modern asymmetric warfare. Moscow, on the other hand, descended into controlled chaos. Russian state media anchors, visibly strained, repeated vague lines about an explosion at a logistics facility. But the silence of key military figures spoke volumes. By the end of the day, even pro-Kremlin Telegram channels stopped posting battlefield maps altogether. The usual confidence, the familiar chest-beating tone, it all evaporated. Rumors swirled through the Russian public. Some said the strike had killed a major general. Others whispered that foreign advisors were among the dead. The truth remained buried, but the damage to Russia's credibility was impossible to hide. Even loyal supporters began questioning how such a heavily fortified facility could be obliterated without warning. "If this can happen to them," one commentator said quietly on a Moscow radio show before being cut off. Then what's next? Western Europe reacted swiftly. The German defense minister praised Ukraine's extraordinary operational discipline. In London, analysts described the strike as a turning point in command warfare. NATO officials released a carefully worded statement applauding Ukraine's right to defend itself, while sidestepping any direct mention of US weapon involvement. But everyone knew the alliance was watching, and quietly impressed. And then came the ripple effect. The strike triggered what military strategists call a cascade failure. Russian logistics convoys rerouted chaotically, some ending up trapped behind Ukrainian advances. Artillery units missed supply deadlines. A single destroyed tunnel had created a domino effect that rippled across 100 kilometers of front line. On the psychological level, the impact was even deeper. Russian soldiers began refusing to sleep in permanent bunkers, fearing another JDAM from nowhere. Drone footage later showed makeshift camps hastily relocated into open fields, ironically, more vulnerable to smaller attacks. Ukraine had forced them into a dilemma: hide underground and die instantly, or stay exposed and die slowly. That's not strategy, it's paralysis. Internationally, the symbolism was unmistakable. The strike represented not only Ukraine's growing technological mastery, but also its psychological ascendancy. It said to the world, we can wait, we can plan, and we can strike exactly when it matters most. And that message resonated far beyond the battlefield. In European capitals, once hesitant governments began reconsidering new aid packages. In Washington, think tanks revised their projections of how long Russia could sustain the war. Confidence in Ukraine was surging. But inside Russia, confidence was collapsing. Reports emerged of frantic internal meetings within the Federal Security Service, FSB. Some sources claimed that satellite data leaks or compromised encryption protocols might have given Ukraine the upper hand. Others whispered of betrayal, perhaps a mole deep within their own ranks. Every theory pointed to the same conclusion. Russia's war machine had been penetrated from within. In a symbolic moment, days later, Russian television quietly cancelled a scheduled documentary celebrating the unbreakable command network of the Russian army. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The network had literally been broken in both structure and spirit. By the end of that week, the tunnel-based strike was no longer a military event. It was a political earthquake. It weakened Moscow's hand in diplomatic talks, strained morale among allied militias, and exposed the cracks in Russia's claim of control. It wasn't just a bomb, it was a mirror reflecting a harsh truth. The myth of Russian invulnerability had been shattered. And yet, while the world analyzed the numbers, debated the tactics, and broadcast the footage, few noticed the subtler story unfolding behind it, the quiet recalibration of global power. Because if Ukraine could coordinate such a precise, devastating strike with limited resources, imagine what it could do with full Western backing. That thought alone sent tremors through every defense ministry in Europe. But this chain reaction wasn't over yet. What happened after Moscow's silence, how the Kremlin chose to respond, and how that response backfired would define the next chapter of the war. Stay tuned, because in the final part, we'll uncover how Russia's desperate retaliation attempt only deepened its crisis and revealed a truth it could no longer hide. The silence in Moscow didn't last long. It never does. Within 48 hours of the tunnel-based strike, the Kremlin launched its counter-offensive not on the battlefield, but on the airwaves. State media began pushing a new narrative, that the explosion had been caused by a Ukrainian terrorist device, that no generals were harmed, that normal operations had resumed. But the world wasn't buying it. The footage told the truth: the tunnel was gone, and Russia's command network had collapsed like a house of cards. Inside the Kremlin walls, the mood was pure desperation. Reports leaked that President Putin personally ordered a retaliatory strike of equal psychological weight. Missiles screamed across the night sky toward Ukrainian infrastructure, hitting power substations and apartment blocks. Moscow wanted revenge, something to show its citizens that the empire still had teeth. But those attacks only revealed a deeper problem. Russia was no longer reacting strategically. It was lashing out emotionally, fighting ghosts instead of enemies. Ukraine, meanwhile, barely flinched. Within hours of the blackout strikes, emergency teams restored power to key cities. Drones continued to prowl the front lines. The message from Kyiv was clear. You can destroy our wires, but not our will. What Moscow saw as retaliation, Ukraine saw as weakness, a final gasp from a system that had lost control. In the Western capitals, the narrative shifted overnight. What began as cautious optimism turned into open confidence. The United States quietly approved another shipment of JDAM kits, while the United Kingdom authorized additional drone reconnaissance support. France offered air defense coordination. The war that once seemed like a stalemate was suddenly tilting and fast. The precision strike on that tunnel hadn't just crippled a base, it had reignited Western belief that Russia's war machine could, in fact, be dismantled piece by piece. But the real turning point wasn't military, it was psychological. Russian soldiers began refusing orders. Field commanders reported entire platoons going silent on encrypted channels. They don't trust the bunkers anymore. One captured Russian officer confessed. They think the sky is listening. It was paranoia, pure and raw, and Ukraine fed it expertly. Within days, Ukrainian intelligence released intercepted calls of Russian troops begging to be reassigned away from Donetsk. The tunnels are cursed, one voice said. Every time we hide, something finds us. Meanwhile, analysts in Washington started using a new term, intelligent attrition. Ukraine wasn't just destroying hardware, it was dissolving confidence. Every JDAM, every drone strike, every intercepted communication was a needle in the mind of the Russian command. And with each day, those needles dug deeper. Inside Russia, cracks widened. The military blamed the FSB for leaking coordinates. The FSB blamed rogue officers. The Ministry of Defense blamed foreign satellites. The Kremlin blamed NATO. And the public, confused, anxious, exhausted, began blaming the Kremlin. Suddenly, loyalty was no longer certainty, it was survival instinct. The foundation of Putin's unshakable control was starting to fracture under the weight of its own lies. But Ukraine wasn't celebrating. It couldn't afford to. Zelensky's advisors knew that Russia's next move would be unpredictable, perhaps even reckless. The JDAM strike had humiliated the Kremlin, and humiliation is the most dangerous fuel in politics. They prepared for everything: cyber attacks, missile barrages, propaganda floods, and right on cue, Moscow tried all three. For 2 straight nights, missiles rained down on Kyiv, Kharkiv, and Odessa. The air sirens wailed across the darkened cities, but this time most of the missiles never hit. Ukraine's upgraded Patriot systems intercepted the majority mid-air. The few that landed caused damage, yes, but nothing close to what Moscow promised. By the 3rd night, something remarkable happened. Ukrainians stopped running to basements. They stood on balconies, watching the sky burn, and they cheered every interception. The fear was gone. In its place, defiance. It was then that international reporters began calling the event the tunnel strike ripple. What started as a single explosion in the east had evolved into a wave that changed the psychological weather of the entire war. Confidence surged, recruitment rose, donations poured into Ukraine's military relief programs. NATO intelligence even reported increased sabotage activity inside Russia itself. Citizens cutting railway lines, setting fuel depots ablaze, whispering that retribution is coming. In Europe, leaders met behind closed doors to discuss the implications. A confidential NATO report, later leaked to the press, described the strike as a paradigm shift in hybrid warfare. It concluded, Ukraine has proven that precision, timing, and intelligence can overcome numerical superiority. That sentence echoed across every newsroom in the world. The underdog had just rewritten the playbook. For Russia, however, the fallout was catastrophic. The loss of the tunnel base disrupted not only command networks, but also morale among allied militias in occupied regions. Several Wagner-linked units refused to redeploy. Local collaborators began fleeing with their families. Supply depots once considered secure were abandoned overnight. It wasn't just a strike, it was contagion. And then came the part the Kremlin feared most. The world's perception shifted. For the first time since the invasion began, international headlines didn't call Ukraine embattled. They called it dominant. Opinion polls across Europe showed record-breaking support for continued aid. Even nations once hesitant to take sides began speaking out. The world was waking up to a new truth. The war was no longer about endurance. It was about innovation. And Ukraine was winning that war every single day. Back in Donetsk, drone footage captured what was left of the tunnel complex. A black scar across green earth. Silent, smoldering, surrounded by scorched vehicles. It became a symbol, an icon of resistance. Ukrainian filmmakers turned the footage into documentaries. Artists painted murals. Schools named lessons after it. What Russia saw as loss, Ukraine turned into legend. And yet, even amid the celebration, the Ukrainian high command stayed grounded. One senior officer summed it up best. Victory doesn't come from one explosion. It comes from every soldier who waited, watched, and believed we could make that explosion count. That statement spread online like wildfire. It wasn't just about the weapon, it was about the mindset, precision, patience, and purpose. Weeks later, Western intelligence intercepted another Russian communique. It contained a chilling confession from a senior colonel near Luhansk. We no longer plan offensives, we plan survival. That single line captured the essence of what had changed. Ukraine wasn't just defending territory anymore, it was rewriting the rules of modern warfare. In the end, the strike on that tunnel base did more than destroy a bunker. It destroyed certainty. It proved that arrogance can be mapped, that timing can be weaponized, and that patience armed with technology and courage can bring empires to their knees. And as the fires died down in the east, one question echoed louder than any explosion. If Ukraine could turn one bunker into a crater, what would they target next? Because everyone from the Kremlin to the Pentagon knew the same thing. The war had entered a new phase. The hunter had become the hunted. Stay tuned, because next we uncover how Russia's desperate attempt to reclaim its image led to one of its most humiliating defeats yet, when celebration turned into chaos. And 270-kilogram bombs found their mark at a Russian power plant deep inside occupied territory. And that's where the war stands tonight, deep under the shattered soil of Donetsk. Russia's once secure command hub lies in ruins, generals gone, communications cut, An empire built on fear, suddenly unsure of who's still giving the orders. Ukraine didn't just strike a tunnel, it struck the nerve center of Moscow's war machine. But this story doesn't end with rubble, it begins there. Because what Ukraine did with a single 900-kilogram precision bomb has redrawn the map of modern warfare. Every Russian commander is now looking over his shoulder, wondering which bunker, which convoy, which meeting room might be next. The question haunting the Kremlin tonight isn't how Ukraine did it, it's how many more of these are coming. So what do you think? Was this the moment Ukraine proved that intelligence can outmatch intimidation? Or is Russia preparing to retaliate with something even more desperate? Leave your thoughts below, I read every one. If you want the updates the Kremlin hopes you'll never see hit, like, share this story, and subscribe so you don't miss the next wave of strikes that could reshape this war. Stay alert, stay aware, and as always, keep your eyes on the front.